Okay, well, I think this lighting is perfect actually for the story I'm about to tell. It's actually the glow from my Big Buddy heater, but it works out good because the eerie red glow suits the story. And this is another true story. I know some may not believe it, but it is true. And it took place in 1980 when I was 12 years old, the same year as all the stuff that happened in the haunted convent and all that. Now, I wasn't a witness to this. I heard about it after the fact. It was pretty well talked about around town, around my hometown of Perth, Ontario, Canada. I'm going to need to set the scene a bit for you here so you know what I'm talking about. If you're leaving Perth, Ontario, Canada, and heading for the town of Smiths Falls on Highway 43, as you're leaving town, to your right, you will see the Civitan Hall. And the Civitan is a service club. They're kind of well known for providing people with medical aids and things like that. Like if you're recuperating from something and you need a hospital bed at your house, or if you need special, rails and things for your toilet and whatnot in your bathroom, and things for your safety rails for your bathtub and all that. They provide stuff like that. If you need a wheelchair or a walker or a cane, they'll provide you with that. And yeah, they're known to do that for people anyway. And that's the Civitan Club. And they have a meeting hall, that they'll rent out for meetings, and it's also where they have their own club meetings. It's basically their clubhouse. But they'll rent that out for receptions and meetings. I've gone to wedding receptions there and stuff. I never used to like going to wedding receptions there because the ceiling was low, and back when everybody smoked, it was awful. Like all the cigarette smoke would get trapped in there, and it was toxic. Really, I never liked that. But of course now you can't smoke in those places, so it won't be like that now. But anyway, back in the day it was, and I remember I didn't like it very much if I went to a reception there. But anyway, the Civitan Hall's on one side of the road, on the right-hand side of the road, if you're leaving Perth heading towards Smiths Falls. On the other side of the road is the Canadian Pacific Railway line. There's a set of train tracks there. And on the other side of the tracks is the Catholic cemetery, the Roman Catholic cemetery, St. John the Baptist Cemetery. I actually have people buried there, my dad and my grandparents. And I have some great aunts and uncles and other people that I know that are buried in that cemetery. Anyway, back in 1980, there was a meeting held, and I don't know exactly what the purpose of the meeting was, but it was held at the Civitan Hall, and it was a lot of the the upper crust of the community, doctors, lawyers, a lot of businessmen, all attended this meeting. Like I say, I don't know what it was about exactly, but it had a lot of very prominent members of the community at it. And that'll factor into the story a little bit anyway. One of the attendees was a young man who was just starting out in the insurance business. And I know who he was. I know his name. I'm not going to say it, but I do know it. I'm not going to tell you here. But anyway, he was a young man, I would guess in his early 20s, and he was just starting out in the insurance business. Anyway, at the end of the meeting, all these people, all these men came out of the hall, and they did what people do on a nice day. Before they leave a place, they were just standing around in the parking lot having a visit, smoking cigarettes beside their cars and talking, and basically, how's the wife and kids and all that. How about that team? Who do you think's going to win the game on Saturday or whatever, all that stuff. Anyway, this young fella that was selling insurance that had attended the meeting, he was on foot. And so he walks out of the parking lot, across the road, and he starts walking along the rail line, walking beside the railroad tracks. Now we got the highway, we got the highway, the railroad tracks, and then we got the cemetery. Okay, and the Civitan Hall is on the opposite side of the highway, with the parking lot and everything. So the people in the parking lot had a good view. All those men in the parking lot had a good view of the cemetery and of the rail line and so on. And also back then things weren't as built up as they are now, so you'd see for a further distance. There was less to block your view in those days. Anyway, this fellow, he goes across, this young man, he's walking beside the railroad tracks, and there's a train coming. Okay, there's a train coming, freight train. This was the CPR, Canadian Pacific Railroad track. There was a freight train coming. So you can hear the freight train there rattling along, and you can hear the womp, 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 because there's also a level crossing there. There's a side road that turns off of Highway 43 and goes across the tracks and goes down the opposite side of the cemetery. So, of course, he's approaching a level crossing. He's got to sound his horn. So you hear the womp, womp. Well, the fellow that was walking along the tracks, he steps to the side, because you don't want to be too close to a train. Really you don't, because it's just not a good idea to get too close to a moving train. So he steps to the side and he stands there so that the train can go by. The train hasn't gotten to him yet, but he's being careful. He's stepping to the side, before it gets there. Well, just at that moment, this huge black shadow rises up out of the cemetery. And it was in the shape of a man. It looked like a huge man, but it was like a black shadow. It rose right up out of the ground, and it floated through the air, went across the tracks. It picked the young man up, picked him right up off his feet, and threw him into the path of the train. He was killed. And everybody in the yard across the street, across the road, saw it. And they all acknowledged that they saw this happen, too. There was nobody trying to say it didn't happen. They all saw it happen. And, these were people who would be generally pretty concerned about public perception and so on. They wouldn't want to come across like they were unstable or whatever. Maybe because so many of them saw it, their safety in numbers. If it had just been one of them, then maybe he would have said, "Oh no, I didn't see that." But they all saw it, and they all said they saw it, and it was pretty well talked about around Perth anyway that this had happened. And I remember hearing it when I was 12 years old, and it really creeped me out anyway. It was quite a thing to hear such a thing, that this had happened. And anyway, like I say, these were all people who were very prominent in the community, all people who would tend to be very concerned about how they would be perceived, much more so than the average person. If you're on trial, you don't want a lawyer who hallucinates. Or if you're on trial, if you're going in to have surgery, you don't want a doctor who has visions, who sees things and stuff, because, and especially in 1980. In 1980, spiritual things like that weren't accepted the way they are now. I remember when I saw the things I saw in the convent in Eganville, I kept that to myself at the time. I didn't say very much about it. I didn't tell very many people, because I knew how I would be perceived if I did, And let's face it, back then, if you were getting operated on, most people wouldn't want a doctor who was seeing things. I'd say, well, what happens if you go into one of your spells mid-operation where you got me splayed out on the table there, am I going to end up with my liver stitched to my forehead? I don't think I want you operating on me. That's the way people would have been back then. Even now a lot of people would be, but back then practically everyone would be. And so, like I say, these weren't people that would just make that up. These aren't people that would normally admit to seeing that even if they did see it. But they did admit to seeing it anyway, so I tend to believe them. And, yeah, that's the story. That's the story there that happened anyway with the young man who was selling insurance and got picked up by some big entity of some sort, some big shadow type entity, and thrown into the path of a train in 1980. Alrighty, that's it. That's all I've got to tell you for now. Quite a story. Rocky's still asleep on his coat. Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you later.